Hey, everybody, welcome back to another fantastic edition of the His and Her Money Show, where we make it our business to help you take dominion over your money and your life. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the show because, hey, you could be listening to a whole lot of things, but you're here with us. And for that, we just wanted to say thank you and let you know that we're grateful. And I want to highly suggest that for this episode that you get out some pen and paper, that you open up your notes app on your iPad if you're listening to this on your iPhone, because we don't believe in Androids over here. But if you happen to have an Android, I'm sure there's some type of app that you could take notes on as well. But we have a very special guest for today's episode. We've been a big fan of our guest work for a very long time. He wrote one of our favorite books of all time called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And then he rewrote it again. And then we reread it again. And he also has a fantastic website. He also has a fantastic podcast where he continues to drop knowledge for 10 plus years now. His name is Ramit Sethi. A lot of you have heard of him, but some have not. And so it's always been our desire to have him on the show because we are big fans of the work that he does. And guess what? The time is now. He is here, and we are about to embark on a very needed conversation around money and relationships. So get ready because it's going to be a good one. So here we go. Hey, Ramit, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, we are super excited. As we mentioned ahead, we have been fans of your work for so long, and we really appreciate the way that you do what you do and how you do it. And we're glad that now you're here on the His and Her Money Show with us. But some people are being introduced to you for the very first time right here and right now. So for them, can you say hello and then let them know what you're all about?
Yeah, my name is Ramit. And ever since I was young, I never really connected with the usual money advice that people would give me. You know, there were people that didn't look like me. I'm Indian. My parents are immigrants. And they were usually older men pointing down and telling me what I couldn't do with my money. No, you can't buy lattes. No, you can't go on vacation. No, you can't buy those clothes. No, no, no. I didn't want to live a life like that. I want to live a life where I can buy a round of drinks for my friends, where I can take a trip and not worry about staying an extra night or maybe even ordering room service. And so as I started to develop my philosophy around money, I also combined it with my training in psychology and human behavior. And suddenly you start to realize most of us want to do the right thing with money, but we're told cut back on everything. We're taught all these confusing terms, which we don't understand how they fit together. And so for the last 20 years, I've been writing about money, psychology, business, and careers, including a best-selling book and a podcast and a website.
So what I love about your approach is what you just mentioned. In both versions of I Will Teach You to Be Rich, you have, it's like it's your own thing, right? It's not this cookie cutter approach to personal finance, because we always say when it comes to personal finance, the word personal comes before the word finance. And so I love how you and your philosophy is such that you do need to have some semblance of organization with your money, but you also need to make a priority of the things that mean the most to you. And you don't need to get rid of everything, but you do need to maybe get rid of some things that will allow for the things that are of the highest priority in your heart or bring you pleasure to still happen in your life. So can you kind of lay that out for people who haven't dove into I Will Teach You to Be Rich yet?
Here's a philosophy that I have, and I'm going to show you how it applies to your life. I believe you should spend extravagantly on the things you love if you cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't. Now, let me tell you what that can mean. That can mean eating out. It can mean buying beautiful clothes or bags or vacations or a car. I don't care what it is you buy. I'm not judgmental about how you spend your money. If anything, I want you to spend more on the things you love. Most of us have never heard this. It's shocking to us because we've always been told, cut back, back, back. So here's a little exercise I want everybody to go through with me. It's simple. It's 2 questions. What is the thing you love spending money on? I'm not talking about like you love it. Everybody listening already knows. Look at that smile on your face. I can see everybody's smile. The most common answers in order are eating out, travel, health, and wellness. Those are the top three answers. These are what I call money dials. Okay. Think of a dial on your radio. It's like a money dial. We're going to turn it up in just a second. After those three, there are a variety of other things. There's experience, there's convenience, which is my money dial. There's even status. It's totally fine to spend on status. Just be honest about it. So pick your money dial. What is that thing you love spending on? Okay, question number two. Actually, what is your answer out of curiosity?
Right out the gate, my number one would have been clothing.
Love it. Okay. Hey, that's one of my money dials as well. Okay, so we're speaking the same language here. Now, here's question number two. Get ready for this one. If you could quadruple your spending on that money dial, what would it look like and what would it feel like? Go ahead. Let me hear your answer.
It would look like going into a store, clothing store particularly, and not worrying about what the price was first, worrying about whether I like the way it looked first.
Great. Love it. Now turn that dial up. Let's go to 6X or 10X. What would it look like and feel like to you now?
If I turned it up some more, going into stores I've never been in because I
There you go.
just automatically assume that I'm not willing to pay that price.
That is what I'm talking about. Okay. I went on book tour. I remember one of my most vivid moments. I went to DC and I had a great crowd. It was standing room only. And I did this exercise and there was a young man in there, probably late 20s. He said, my money dial is eating out. I said, okay, great. That's everybody's money dial. Cool. What would it look like and feel like? And he said the same joke that everybody says. Ha, ha, ha. I'd probably have to get on a diet because I'd be eating out 4 times a week. Ha, ha, ha. I said, okay, that's funny. But think about it. If you quadrupled your spending on that thing you love, does it just mean that you would buy more of it? And he starts getting quiet. He goes, no, I have a list of every Michelin starred restaurant in DC that I would go to. I said, now we're talking. Who would you take with you? And it got very quiet. He said, my family. I said, why your family? He said, because they have never been able to afford that kind of meal. That's a money dial. It's not just about buying more. It's about making it meaningful to you so it fits you like a handmade glove. And when we start there, when we actually start by asking ourselves, what do I love spending money on? How do I use money to create joy? How do I use to create satisfaction? Then it becomes a lot easier to cut back on the knucklehead stuff that we don't need or want. That's what I want with my philosophy and with money dials.
Yeah, good stuff. That's why, guys, that's why we had Ramit here because I love the way he does this thing, man. Now I'm all excited. I want to go shopping. Thanks a lot, Ramit. Jeez. All right, let me come back to the interview. So I remember when I read book number 1, you were single. When I read book number 2, you're married. So did anything change with your approach, your philosophy, your outlook, your dials once you entered into a relationship?
It definitely did. I'm so glad you bring this up because money and relationships are one of those taboo topics that we hear about mostly from TV. But think about it. When was the last time you actually heard a couple really talking about money? I'm talking about actual numbers, actual fights, hearing people cry or say, why did you do that? Never. So that was the genesis of my podcast. And it all started with my wife and I talking about money. So we came into our relationship at very different perspectives and amounts of money. I'd been running a business maybe 15 years. She had not. We started talking about things like, how much do we each have, right? What is that basic first conversation you have about money? We started talking about a prenup. We started having these discussions, which started off pretty good, but then they got really tough. And so through this time, after we got married, I said, oh, good, we're done with all that stuff. Wrong. That's where it just begins. That's where you start talking about, how do we want to spend our money? How do we want to set our money up? What's worth it to us? What kind of life do we want to live? And so, yeah, my philosophy changed a lot. It went from just me as a single guy. I don't have to check with anybody. Now I want to create a shared vision with my wife and someday our family, and starting to talk about money in a different way. Sometimes we have people who are highly technical. They like to talk about spreadsheets and they want to talk about expense ratios. Well, what if your partner doesn't want to? Or what if your partner's totally avoidant? That's the kind of stuff that I explore now in the newest edition of the book and on the podcast.
Yeah. How did you approach the initially? What was the first conversation? We'll go back to, you're married now, but even in dating, because a lot of people ask us that question: when should I start having the conversation, or when should I start looking at the social cues around their finances?
Well, it's funny. A lot of the advice in personal finance is, I find it to be very out of touch. It's very theoretical. So you'll hear all these experts. They're like, you need to talk about money on the first date. I'm like, have you ever been on a first date? What is wrong with you? You could tell these people have never been on a date. I'm like, get out of here. I don't even, it's outrageous. And so I'm like, listen, I lived in New York. I went on a lot of dates. Nobody's talking about their financial situation and their Roth IRA on date number one. Get a life. But you should talk about it when you start to get serious. Now, what does that mean? It could be early on when you say, okay, we're exclusive, if that's what you choose. Or it might be if you move in together, certainly when you're engaged. Now, I'm going to admit something. I broke my own rule. I broke my own rule because we were engaged and I already knew about my wife's finances because she had asked me for some help with a 401k. I was like, yeah, you ought to read this book. It's called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Take a look. So I gave her my book. I was like, talk to me after that. So I knew about all her numbers. And then she goes to me, she goes, this is much later. She goes, it feels a little unfair because I actually don't know about your numbers, but you know all of mine. And I was like, is that moment you realize, I've been a bit of a hypocrite. And I told everybody in chapter 9 of my book, have a conversation early on when things get serious. And I didn't do it myself. I said, okay, you're right. I got to fix this. So we talked about it. And here's one lesson I learned. A lot of us use the phrase, we need to have the conversation about money. The conversation. Let me ask you, for anyone who's a parent, do you have the conversation about kids? No, you have 1,000 conversations about kids. You're going to talk about money until the day you die. And you should. Money, for most of us, is this scary thing. Oh my God, we only talk about it when we fight. No, it can be a source of joy. It can be a source of fun, adventure, experience, generosity. But I had one of many conversations when I first started talking about, here's how much I have, and here's what I think it means for us.
Now, what would be your advice to someone they're in that thing? They're married 5, 7, 10 years, right?
They go, oh, I
And
should
money
have done
has
this
always
early.
been weird.
Yeah.
Money has always been the thing we touched on. We double dutch, jump one foot in and come back out. But they're at a place like we've got to figure this out.
Yeah.
How do they approach this new topic in an old relationship?
Okay. I like this question because it's more complicated when you've been married for a while. You have habits, you have spending, you have little grooves that you've each carved in your relationship. So here's how you do it. First off, I believe in taking a long time. Make a long story long. We're in no rush to solve this in one conversation. It's going to take a while. That's totally fine. So the first thing I would suggest is, instead of opening up your books and looking at some P&L, which nobody's going to do, start off really gentle. If there's a TV episode that you both watch when somebody talks about money, hit pause and say, hey, what do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Would you do the same thing? I think that was pretty cool. Or listen to my podcast where it's about money and relationships. Take one episode on a road trip and go, what do you think about this? This person seems nuts. Talk about it. Then, as you start to open that conversation up, here's how you do a more serious set of conversation. I call it a rich life review. Notice I do not call it a budget conversation because none of us want to have a budget. None of us even want to have a budget. So you set aside 1 hour per month. It's not per week. It's not per year. It's 1 hour per month. You want to pick the time and place really carefully. Most people, they only talk about money when they're fighting. It's reactive. We want to be proactive. Pick a time where you both have, you're caffeinated. You don't have kids running around if possible. And you have just the time and space to really talk. Next, make it fun. When you sit down, imagine how so many of us feel when we talk about money. We're rigid. Oh my God, what's he going to say? What's she going to say? Why'd they do that? No, start off with a compliment. I love something like this. Babe, I just wanted to tell you, you are always so great at finding flight deals whenever we travel. I don't know how you do it, but I'm so glad that you handle our flights because you're amazing at it. Start off with something like that. Now you have an agenda, Okay. A lot of people go, Ramit, that's really weird. Why do I want to have an agenda with my loved one? I go, you know what's weird? Spending the next 45 years of your life fighting over money because you don't actually know how to do it. Why don't you just do it my way? Trust me, it works better than the way you're doing it. So you have an agenda. It says compliment right at the top. You write it out, talk about it. I don't care if it feels contrived. Do you think I care? I care about you two getting on the same page with money. Then you start talking about something nice. I like talking about what is our rich life. It's a great question. I have a whole exercise on my website and podcast. What is our rich life? Start there. Then and only then you can start going into the numbers. Now, the first time you meet, you don't know your numbers. Do you know 90% of the people I talk to don't even know how much debt they owe? 95% of people don't even know what date their debt will be paid off. This couple I just spoke to, it's coming out next week. They make $530,000 a year. And when I asked them, how much money do you make? Let's write it down. They were off by $100,000. Okay, so a lot of people don't even know how much they make. It's fine. It's fine. We're all starting from a different place. I don't care. We'll get them there. So I want you to sit down, just get the basics out on paper. Take a crayon and a single sheet of paper, write them down. All right. Then once you have that stuff, call it a day. You say, you know what? This was great. I love you. Look in their eyes, give them a kiss and say, let's pick it up next month. You don't have to get the entire way on your first meeting. If you fast forward later, these meetings are going to go by so much differently. You're going to have your numbers. You're going to know what you're checking. Checking the numbers takes less than 5 minutes. And to be in charge of all your finances, you should spend less than 1 hour per month.
It's good stuff. Now, I remember you often told the story of how you mentioned earlier that your parents are immigrants and how they handled money impacted you and your view of money. And so when two people come into a relationship, they have two sets of stories about money, whether they realize it or not. And a lot of times they don't realize. How do we conversate about our histories and how they shape our current realities inside our relationship and how we both look at and interact with money?
I call them invisible scripts. We all have these beliefs that we grew up with, we absorbed, we believe, that are so deeply embedded inside of us, we don't even realize that they are there. Let me give you a few. Tell me if any of these hit home. Buying a house is a great investment. Boy, that's a big one in America. Big one. A lot of people really believe that. And maybe that's true for some people, but it's also not true for everybody. Just as a simple example, I could buy a house tomorrow in cash and I choose to rent. Why? It's a better financial decision for me. Here's another one. You should go to college. It's the only way to be successful in this country. Maybe. I actually happen to agree. I think college is great for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot. But how about other invisible scripts like we can't afford that? Money doesn't grow on trees. We don't talk about money in this family. These are phrases we all grew up with, some of us, and it dramatically affects the way we think about money. Here's an example. I speak to a couple on my podcast. They are constantly worried that they're going to run out of money, constantly. I go, okay, where do you guys get that from? They go, I don't know, we're never going to have enough. It could run out tomorrow. I go, I'm looking at your numbers right now. You're millionaires. And they go, yeah, but it could go away tomorrow. I go, not really. I know how compound interest works. It's not going anywhere. Even if one of you lose your jobs, you're fine. And it stems back to hearing over and over, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. So when you play your life on defense like that, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank. A lot of people think, oh, once I have this much money, my feelings are going to change. Wrong. The way you feel about money is highly uncorrelated to the amount you have in the bank.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. And I think that's I think the term invisible scripts is the best way to put it, because it's just what we saw, what we do, and we don't realize that it's playing a role. For me, for example, my parents were very thrifty, I think is the politically correct way to say it. But I had the adverse reaction because of that. When I first got out on my own, I just went crazy and just had no sense, because I decided that I was going to do the complete opposite because I didn't like that. And I ended up in a world of hurt, but we worked our way through it. But I think that for some, my wife had a very similar upbringing, but she replicated it. So she had two similar stories, different reactions to it. And if you don't acknowledge how your history plays a part in your present, it could determine a future that you're not aiming for because you didn't take the time to learn who you are and how you started thinking that way.
That's really beautifully said. I love that. And I think it's kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people in the financial world. You know, in the financial world, there's this idea that if you just try harder, you're going to be successful. And I'm like, listen, I know you told me this is PG rated, so I'm going to hold back on what I really want to say about that advice. But I'll tell you this. I do believe personal responsibility matters. Absolutely, I believe it. But I also believe you can simultaneously acknowledge structural issues. Structural issues for me, I was born in America. I was born to two educated parents. I was lucky. I worked hard, yes, but I also grew up here. And so these structural issues are real and they affect us. And the way my parents talked about money still affects me. For example, like you, my parents were super frugal. And that, in a way, was really good. It taught me that I could do without much. You know, to this day, I still drive an old car. Doesn't matter to me. I'm happy with it. On the other hand, I had to unlearn some of those lessons because I'm at a different level. I'm playing in a different chapter of life, in a large part because of the advantages they gave me. So, guess what? We are affected by the stories that we grow up with, but we can also choose to some extent what future we have. And that's where I think that beautiful blending comes into play.
I want to circle back because you just said something. I drive an old car, but I remember, I don't know if I read this in your book or on your website. There was a time where, and it might still be current, but you got super serious about health and fitness. And you had a personal trainer, you had meal service, but you had an old car. So help us go through that exercise. You mentioned the exercise, but how do we like work this priority list out? Like, I'm going to turn the dial down here and turn the dial up here. How do we introspectively figure out what's important to us and what's not?
Okay. So this is a great example. Remember when I said I want you to spend extravagantly on the things you love and cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't? You know, a lot of people have never really thought about what extravagant means. So when I say, like, what's your rich life? I had somebody say Target, going to Target. I said, that is not your rich life. Going to Target, buying a $4 bottle of Lysol, that's not your rich life. Stop it. And they were shocked. How can you talk to me like that? I love Target. I go, listen, I don't mind if you like going to Target. Okay. It's a fine store, but your rich life cannot be confined to a retail store where you're buying commodities, just a bunch of junk to put in your house. If you tell me that I love going to this specific store because the way it makes me feel, or I'm getting a massage once a month because I like self-care, fine, I'm all for it. But we often limit ourselves. So how do you discover what you want to spend money on and what you don't? Well, there's a way. First off, we start off with the money dials exercise. What do I love spending on? We go through that. Again, you can search for money dials. You'll find that exercise. Then I ask you, what is your rich life? Now, this is the most common answer. People go, I want to do what I want, when I want. They think they're really clever, except like 99% of people say the same thing to me. I go, oh, here we go again. I go, wow, that sounds really good. And what do you want? And then they just stare at me and they blink because they've never actually thought what they want to do. It's hard. Think of driving in the fog. You're driving in the fog. All you can see is 50 feet ahead of you. And somebody asks you, what's down the road 5 miles from now? It's impossible to imagine that if you are stuck in the fog. And so for so many of us, we're stuck in the fog. We are just making monthly payments. We're not thinking about what we want to do this year. We're not saving or investing aggressively. We're just trying to get by every month. We have that 50-foot fog. So once you have these two pieces, the money dial, and you start to address what is your rich life, then you add a third piece. And this is the actual numbers. This is what I call a conscious spending plan. It's not a budget. Budgets are looking backwards. A conscious spending plan is, where do I want my money to go looking forward? So you could download this from my site. Just search for Ramit Conscious Spending Plan. And you will quickly put in your numbers. You don't need them to be exact. Just 85% of the way is good. And you'll quickly see where your money's going. And now, like a puzzle, you can move these pieces around. Hey, I actually want to spend more on clothes. Okay, cool. Well, let's figure it out. And you have options. You can cut costs on certain things that are not important to you. You can earn more, which I love talking about in my Earnable program. There's so many ways to do it, but at least you have a picture of the entire board.
Yeah. I'm also curious about this. Sometimes, a lot of times, you are in a relationship with somebody who compliments you, who's not a replica of you. For example, my wife and I are both aggressive, but financially, but in different ways. She's an aggressive saver. My aggressiveness is in the form of investing. I would rather invest a whole lot more, and she would prefer to save a whole lot more. So whatever that looks like inside a relationship, usually it's aggressiveness in different areas. How have you navigated that, or how would you advise others?
That's a very common one. Although you two are great because you may be aggressive in different ways, but you're on generally the same universe. It's more common that you have one overspender and one underspender, and it's like two magnets repelling each other. So, good job for the two of you. Here's what I would say. You often find that people will, they're fighting over $3 questions. They spend their entire life agonizing over $3 questions. And what they really need to be doing is thinking at the 30,000 foot level. So they'll come to me, they go, I can't believe how much he spends on asparagus. I'm sitting here saying, I don't want to spend even 2 seconds for the rest of my life talking about asparagus. Don't waste my time. Oh, but it's so offensive. I can't believe it. Why doesn't he buy just the regular store? I said, stop talking. I don't care about this. So the real problem here is not asparagus. All right. Nobody cares about the price of asparagus. That's not causing your financial distress. Trust me. I don't care how expensive and organic you buy. The real problem is they don't have a shared rich life vision. So when I ask him, for example, if I were to sit down with you and your wife, I say, well, what is your rich life? You would probably say, well, I have an aggressive investment goal. Maybe I want to retire early. I want to travel. I want to use the 4% rule, whatever. And your wife might say something like, I don't want to worry about money. I want to feel safe. I want to know that we're always going to have enough. Any of this sounding familiar to you? Mm-hmm. So that's okay. That's fine. We can do both. But we need to get those rich life vision items out on the board. And then we need to talk about it, get excited. Oh, so you want to retire early. Wow, that sounds really cool. What would that look like for you? Where would we go? You have to remember that most people, especially in couples, when they talk about money, they fight. When was the last time you, the listener, got curious? You said, oh my God, you love clothes? What kind of clothes? What would it feel like if you were to put that beautiful dress on? People are just craving to be asked these kinds of questions, and it can bring you together. It doesn't mean you have to go out and buy a $1,200 dress tomorrow, but at least for your partner to know, hey, my partner's listening to me. They're curious. Now we can come up with a plan for us to both do what we want to do. Ah, what a beautiful thing.
I'm also curious about this because your dynamic is entrepreneur went into a relationship with a non-entrepreneur, has different mentalities. I've learned that I disgusted my wife about 10 years ago because she's always been entrepreneurially ambitious, and I've always been like, I'll just be the stabilizer. You try all the business things and I'll just go to work. And I literally said, I'll never be an entrepreneur. And she told me later, like, that really disgusted her when I said it. And now lo and behold, I'm an entrepreneur. But it's two different mentalities.
Yeah.
How do you support in both directions? If you're married to a very ambitious, very idea driven entrepreneur, and if you're the entrepreneur married to the non-entrepreneur, how do you, again, show honor, respect, support, accountability when you have two worlds in one house?
When I met my wife, she was working at a 9 to 5 job, and it was a stable income, and that was great. That's what she wanted to do. To me, that was great, right? As long as she had a purpose and she was happy, I was thrilled with it. I never thought that she would become an entrepreneur. And so going into our relationship, when we finally talked about money, it was things like, how much am I going to contribute? Or when she moved in to the apartment that I was living in, even if she contributed proportionally, the expense that I was paying was so much higher than hers that it would have almost felt unfair to her to have to start paying even more. So we had these series of conversations. Some of them were challenging. But what's interesting is a few years later, she actually became an entrepreneur. And so I'll tell you what changed on a personal level and also on a financial level. On a personal level, I teach people how to start a business. I have a program called Earnable. And so I help a lot of people find an idea and then scale it. And many of them end up making $10,000 a month, $25,000 a month, those kinds of things. When I saw my wife starting to do this, I offered her encouragement, but I had to tell myself, shut your mouth, Ramit. Shut your mouth and do not try to tell her all the 25 tactics she should be doing, because she's not my student. She was my fiance and my wife. And so even though there were things I probably would have done differently in the early days, what I had to learn is it's not my business, it's hers. And there was a difficult moment. I remember I came home and it was late. It was something like 10:30, 11, past where we would normally be up. And she was on the couch and I was like, what are you doing? And she said, I'm looking for a part-time job. This was early on in her business. And that was such a haunting moment because, business is tough in the early days. And she was basically saying, like, if this thing doesn't pan out, I got to find another way. And all I could say at that moment was, you're doing all the right things. Sometimes it takes time. I believe in you. Just keep at it. And so on a personal level, it's just about being able to support emotionally and also have that discussion financially. Now, financially is a whole different story. If you have a partner who's thinking of becoming an entrepreneur, this is where you start to have some real honest conversations. How much money are you going to have saved up before you make the move to this business? Create a rule. I love rules. Rules like before I even think about leaving my full-time job, I'm going to have 3 months of expenses in a savings account. That's a great rule. Now the partner can discuss, is it 4? Is it 6? Is it 2? But at least you're talking about that, not you're not a good entrepreneur. You're going to ruin this family. No, let's talk numbers. And you can also say, okay, I totally support your business. How long do we give it before we say this isn't working? What does success look like? What does failure look like? It's kind of like talking about death. Everybody's going to die. Stop hiding it. I sit down with my parents. I go, listen, you're going to die one day. Why are we tiptoeing around it? Let's get honest about it. Create a will. Let's do all this stuff. Same thing with a business. Look, your business might take off. I would love it. I'll support you. We would benefit, but it might also flop. That's reality. Now let's talk about it.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. It's in our minds, we know we need to talk. I think it goes back to your other discipline, which is psychology. Psychologically, there's fear, maybe fear of rejection, fear of offense. And we end up with our mouths closed, Ramit. We know we're supposed to, but it becomes hard psychologically.
It's like so many of us are already insecure about money. Give me 10 people, give me 5 minutes with 10 people. I can find one thing they don't know about money that they're probably losing $5,000 to $10,000 a year. Okay. Money is technical. And most of us were never taught about this stuff. Okay. I don't blame somebody for being ignorant about money, but now that they're listening to this, you better step up. There's a lot of resources out to get my book from the library if you need it. So we're already insecure about our money knowledge. And then we feel strongly about it. So it's like the worst combination. We don't really know what we're talking about, but we have really strong opinions. And then we turn to our partner. We go, you're doing this different than me. That must mean you're wrong. This is a recipe for disaster. So a lot of us have simply never been taught, how do we talk about money? Right? So I love these scripts. I have some of these scripts. I think it's iwt.com/money scripts. And you go there and you see exactly what to say. And that way you're guided. Because when people told me you need to have the conversation about money, I was like, okay, what conversation? Literally just tell me the words to say. And so I think if we were guided in that way, like those money scripts, it becomes a lot easier for us to connect.
Yeah. Guys, I hope that you all have been enjoying this, because he's talking about your bank accounts and your brain cells as well. You need to combine both of them in order to get some healthy dialogue going around this very important topic. But for me, what has been the benefit, maybe for you personally, maybe for the people you've helped, going through this seemingly at times tough process of having these authentic conversations to find synergy financially inside of their relationship?
Well, one of them is it's just a lot more fun. I mean, it sucks if you're fighting about money, if you don't see it the same way. It's just this thing you all tiptoe on eggshells around, and it's horrible. So it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more profitable. Honestly, if the two of you are rowing the same direction, where my wife and I, for example, we have our Rich Life review, we have our Rich Life annual review, and each year we take a very long trip, usually international, and we spend weeks thinking about what went well this year, what would we change, where do we want to travel next year, who do we want to bring with us. That ability to think expansively comes from planning. And it's extra joyful because we spend the whole year talking about where do we want to go? Who do we want to bring with us? And then when we're there, we get to actually experience. It's like a double whammy of joy. I think that it's just more fun. You just create these experiences. And also I told my wife, again, I love to talk about death. I go, listen, one day I'm going to be dead. All right. It's no surprise. I'm going to be out of here. And I'll tell you one thing. If I find out that you were paying a financial advisor 1.25% AUM, I'm going to come down from heaven and I'm going to bring you right up with me. Don't do it. So that's why it's so important to talk about money, especially if you are the savvier person with finances. You know, it's common in relation. There's a lot of gender and relationship issues. It's very common. You'll find the guy is the one who handles the money. And I totally disagree with that. In fact, I insisted with my wife. I said, listen, I could do money for us. This is what I do for a living. I could do it, but I won't. We have to do it together. And I told her why. Number one, I'm going to be dead one day. I want you to feel fully confident, be a great steward of our money. Two, we got to get on the same page. And three, it's just a lot more fun.
Good stuff. All right, guys, I told you to have your pen and paper out because Ramit was going to drop knowledge. Hope you took notes. Hope you had your bullet points, your highlighters, and I hope that you're ready to implement this. But Ramit, people are going to want more of what you offer. Tell them where to keep up with you on the interwebs.
All right. Find me on Instagram at Ramit. Find me at my podcast called I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and use one of the scripts. Go to iwt.com/money scripts. You can use them with your partner. You can even use them on your own. And that's going to start a conversation about what money means to your rich life.
Man, can't say thank you enough, Ramit, for making time out of your super busy schedule to come by the His and Her Money Show and drop your knowledge on us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another fantastic edition of the His and Her Money Show is in the books. I told you it's going to be a good one. I got one of my favorites on here, and he came through just like I knew that he would. Go get his book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. It is fantastic. We told you a lot of times it's been in our top 5 money books of all time, and it's there for a reason. He also has a fantastic podcast. Listen, everything that he mentioned, we have it linked in the show notes. Just go there, click it, and get to work. All right, that's all we got for this time, guys. It's been great. Till next time. Peace.